Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company, and today I want to talk to you about how you transition your garden when your plants are done and you're going to plant a new crop. So we get the question all the time of whether or not you pull it, do you leave it in the ground, do you cut at the base? I'm going to talk about all of that, but before I do, make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button if you love the content that we put out. So let's jump into it. So on our farm, whenever possible, I try to cut the plant basically at the soil level. You can see here, these were some peppers, and leave it in the ground so that the roots can decompose. And now I do that because I have the space, it's not taking up any room, leaving this little nub in here. In fact, I can actually just plant around it. You can see the lettuce behind us. I actually planted around some of the pepper nubs that I left in the ground. And I do that because I want the roots to decompose and actually leave something in the soil versus pulling the whole big thing up and pulling up all of this amazing soil. So in here is a lot of really great, well, look at all these worms that just fell off. You see the little baby worms. You can see the tiny little round worm eggs. So by pulling that up, yes, I can shake out the soil technically, and I could throw this in the compost, and some might argue I'm not really taking too much, but all of this is full of minerals and nitrogen and all the stuff that this plant was eating, and I want it to decompose directly in the ground. The other really important part of leaving it in the ground is when you pull it up, you pull out all these air pockets that were basically in between the roots, and then you're left with basically this hole. I want to leave as much goodness in the soil as possible because I know that by growing vegetable crops over and over and over, I'm extracting a lot from the soil. So we leave our roots in the ground just like this. Eventually, when I'm doing some light raking, it will easily pop up because the roots have completely decomposed, and at that point, it's fine. But I recommend, if you can, cutting your crops right at the base. Now, let's talk a little bit about the downside of that. And that is, in our climate, our weather is so great that sometimes you do that and the plant actually just grows right back. In fact, you can take a look at this huge eggplant I have over there. I didn't plant that there. I cut it off at the base, it overwintered, it grew back this spring massively, and some could say that's a problem. It's actually great, we eat eggplant, it's fine, but sometimes when you cut it off right at the soil, it actually can grow back. It won't actually even die if your soil is really good and you have irrigation, so that might be a downfall to that. Now, so we leave the plants in, as you can see here, little nubs. I do a light rake on top to take off any debris, any leaves or anything like that. So if your soil is really new or very compact, I really recommend that you take either a pitchfork, a broad fork, and you put it down in the soil and you crack open the soil. Basically, all you're doing is you're cracking it open so that air and moisture can get in your soil, which are two key parts of having living, thriving soil. Another thing people talk about is doing chop and drop, where they actually just chop the plant and then they drop and they leave the plant material right on top. In a garden setting or a small farm setting, that doesn't really work. It's not really practical because I need that garden space. I can't drop the plant material on the row and leave it to decompose and still be able to plant. Because I'm doing intensive planting, I need that space, and so I will chop that, I will put it in the compost, let it compost there, and then move it back into the garden once it's fully decomposed. If you have a really big garden, or if you're doing some small scale cover cropping, you can chop it, drop it, and leave it into place, let it decompose, till it into the ground. For small gardens or intensive growers, market growers, it's not really that practical. So we just chop it, put it in the compost, return the compost to the soil when it's finished composting. As a general rule of thumb, these are the things that I would tell anybody if they ask me, how they transition their garden from one crop to the next. I would cut the crop at the base level, which, this was, but the soil is settled. And then I would let the plant decompose. I would take all of that organic matter and put it in the compost, clear off the rows, do any weeding. If you can't easily put your hands in the soil like this, then you might want to consider using a broad fork or a pitchfork to crack open the soil and let air in. And if you have a newer garden and your soil isn't mature and dark like this, then always add compost at every season change. Basically, you're returning to the soil what you've pulled out of the soil via organic matter. And lastly, don't be afraid to fertilize. Fertilizing is important, especially if you want really productive, happy vegetable plants. I recommend using an all-organic, all-purpose fertilizer that has beneficial microbes in it, and it should be a well-balanced one that has low numbers, meaning the nitrogen, the potassium, and the phosphorus shouldn't be extremely high. It should be like a 5-5-5 is what I really like using. Kellogg has a Paradise fertilizer that is 5-5-5 that we use, and it's a granular fertilizer. It gets put into the rows before we plant, and it slowly breaks down and it feeds the plants over the lifespan of the plant. So don't be afraid to fertilize. Obviously, you want to be responsible. You want to read the package and use the recommended amount that they have on there. Don't go crazy. But just know that every season that you grow, especially big hungry plants like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, they're pulling a lot of nutrients out of the soil, and you need to return that before you plant another crop.